cut a handmade stencil. And we're going to use this material, which is basically just a plastic file folder. They come differently, but this one actually was connected over here, and I just cut that off. I'm going to cut this in half and cut it so that it's a little bit larger than my 5 by 7 inch stencil surface. I have my plastic over the top of my geometric grid. And I find the easiest way to do this is kind of mark some of these edges that I need to keep. I think I need this one stabilized a bit more, so I'm going to put a piece of tape at the bottom too. Once I started doing this, I realized that I actually preferred just to freehand it, so I decided to just use my X-Acto knife and just trace my lines. So that's what I'm doing now, and I just wanted to show you that. Big reveal. Pull my tape off. I can see my stencil. One thing I can do is I can take a pair of scissors and just kind of clean up some of those edges that I think are a little rough. Let me get my plate. We'll come back. We'll print this, and then we're also going to print a commercial stencil, just to show you the difference between the two. Let's make a print. We're going to use the geometric stencil that we just cut. We're also going to use this Stencil Girl stencil, and this is S734. And this is, I don't remember what the name of this one is called. I'll have it for you. I'll have it for you later. I'll probably put it in a scroll at the bottom. But S734 is the number of the stencil. This is a 6 by 6 inch stencil. And a commercial stencil will work just as well as your handmade stencil for this technique that I'm going to show you. Also, I've got a white piece of scrapbooking paper, the premium acrylic. I just like it. We're also going to use a little bit of light buttermilk. I use the premium acrylic because for this technique it actually works better. The Americana paints don't work for this technique as well. And I think it's because the Americana paints have more filler in them than the premium paints do. The premium paints have more pigment in them. They're a heavier pigment load. And I'm going to use the stencil that we just cut. And I'm going to line it up as well as I can. I'm going to take a piece of deli paper. Why deli paper? Well, you can use computer paper for this purpose. What I like about deli paper is it pulls the paint up really well. And I can see through it. So I can see where my paint is. Take a couple times. There we go. We're going to do a second one. So I want to get as much of that paint off of the negative spaces in my stencil as I possibly can. Okay, there's the second one. And I'm going to use a piece of deli paper that was used for another purpose. And I think I'm going to go one more time just to see what else I can pick up. Pull off my stencil. And the paint comes off on the stencil, but it also remains on my plate, just like that. Let me flip it over so you can see it. It's going to look just like that. This has to sit and dry. I'm back, and I'm going to use this Stencil Girl stencil. Again, I'm going to use the premium acrylic in Payne's Gray. But for this technique in particular, I found that you need to have a clean stencil to get a good image. You also need a little bit more paint than what you normally would do for a transparent type layer. Okay, now this is a 6 by 6 inch stencil. So I'm going to lay it down, and then I'm going to have all this space left over. And I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to take my piece of deli paper, I'm going to lay it down, second one. Okay, now I'm going to pull this up, set it off to the side, and I'm going to pull up that bar that's down on the bottom, so I don't want that in my print. So I'm just going to pick that up. And I'm going to do it again. Let's pull up these two prints. We're going to use light buttermilk. I want these to have kind of that antique-y look, and I can tell these are dry because I can put my fingers down on top of them. That's about, it's not quite as big as a quarter. I find that it takes a little bit more paint to do a pull-up print than what you would normally use. Place this face down onto your paper. Go back over the top of it. That's what it's going to look like. We're going to let this dry. It needs to sit. Sometimes I will let these sit over as long as overnight. Same amount of paint. Piece of paper, lay it down. That's what this one is going to look like. We're going to develop a layered print, and we're going to use some moon yellow for our base layer. We're not going to put as much paint on this layer as we did on our last layer. That's about maybe the size of a dime I've put out. Let me brayer it out. And remember, brayering is not like rolling out pie dough or cookie dough. It's a swish, swish. Raise your brayer, lower it. This is a paper doily. That's all it is. And it's a pretty big one. I'm not sure the size of it. I'd have to measure it. But it's at least probably 7.5 or 8 inches. I'm going to lay it down and just kind of stick it down. And this is going to be my base layer, so I'm not really worried if it's perfect. Just rolling right over the top of it. I'm going to pick up my print. I'm going to lay it down, and I'm going to let that sit for just a few minutes. Let's pull this print off, see how it didn't show up well, didn't print onto my paper well. So I want this to be actually a better print than what it is. So I'm going to take a little bit of white because I want to maintain that white in the background. I'm going to go right over the top of this, brayer it out, let's take the same paper, go right over the top of it, flip this over, and this I'm going to let sit until I feel the back of this and it no longer feels damp. Alright, big reveal. Looking under this to make sure it's pulling up, and it is. That's great. So that's just a little trick for you. If your print doesn't pull up, and occasionally they won't because these types of paints dry very, very quickly, just go ahead and use that trick. We're going to use a little bit of primary magenta, and I'm not going to use as much as I have been using before. I want this to be fairly transparent. And I do want to work rather quickly because I'd like this to transfer to my print. So I'm going to use circle tools. These are lids. I have a foam sponge. This is a chapstick lid, the top of a dryer part. So I'm just going to lay them down and just kind of randomly apply my circle shapes. I'm going to use a smaller one. Let's use this chapstick lid, and I'm just kind of twirling it just to remove some of the paint. And I'm going to try this big one too. I'm going to give it a little bit more of a swish. And I'm going to try this foam stamp. And I think I want a little bit more here. And maybe use this one again too. Okay, now let's take our print from before, and this is what our next layer is going to look like. I'm going to just layer it down right over the top, and because I'm using my acrylic block, I can see where to position my paper. I'm going to go back over the top of it, because I just want to get all of that paint from my plate to release onto my paper as is possible. I'm going to turn that over and just let it sit for just a few minutes. Reveal. And that looks pretty great. You can see the yellow and the white through the circles. We're going to build a layered, so we're going to start with a turquoise blue. And I have two gel plates here. I'm going to use one as a palette. I'm going to use a makeup sponge. Just going to tap it out. And I'm using, this is a Tim Holtz stencil, it's called Burlap. And I'm just going to randomly stencil turquoise blue into areas, not even really thinking. Just putting some on here. Pull that off, you can see what I've got. And I'm going to move over here, leave a little bit of space, add some more. And that's pretty good. Now I'm going to let that dry. I can use this turquoise blue to add another layer to this print. So I'm going to put some of this on here. Lay this, because this is potentially still wet, I'm going to use the other side. Just going to lay some down here. I'm not going to worry about that yet. I'm going to pay attention to where I'm placing this. So I'm just going to rub my fingers across this and hope that it just kind of randomly adheres, just like that. I can grab a little bit more. I could probably get some up here. And I'm really not even thinking about it. I'm just laying my paper over the top of it, and I'm pressing to get that paint to transfer onto my paper. Okay, just a little bit. And I might want to apply some of that. And this I'm going to just lay this gently, and I'm just going to wipe across it like that. And again, I'm just seeing if there's any paint left on this plate that I could potentially pick up. And one more, right at the bottom. Okay. This is almost dry, this is almost dry. I use this stencil, this Tim Holtz burlap stencil. But what if you don't have this stencil, or you don't have something similar to it? You could use a couple different types of drywall tape. You could also use a piece of punchinella. This would work as well. So any of those are good options if you don't have this particular stencil. Using the same materials that we used to develop this print, we could use in a different way. Place a little bit of moon yellow onto my palette. And these may not even be the same lids that I used a minute ago. And I'm going to stamp. I'm going to just set that aside. I'm going to use a thicker lid. Okay. And maybe a few of the small chapsticks sized lid. My next layer, I'm going to add a little bit of primary magenta to this print, and I'm going to use this foam stamp. Now, what could you use if you don't have this foam stamp? Well, you could just use different sized lids and just stamp them one inside the other. So I'm going to load up my foam stamp. I'm going to stamp randomly. Okay. Could use some here, maybe some here. Okay, I have to let those dry. These are the 3 prints that I completed using the techniques that I just showed you. And you can see how similar techniques, same paint colors, but very different results. Paper that we're going to print. We're going to use Indian Turquoise, Bahama Blue, and Laguna, and they're all Deco Art paint colors. A couple pieces of deli paper, and this is an 8 by 10 inch gel plate. I'm also going to use my 4-inch brayer. This one is overlapping filled circles, L777. This is another Stencil Girl stencil. This is called Random Circles. This is L071. And this is the third one I'm going to use. This is called Circles. This is another Stencil Girl stencil. And this is L301. We're going to start with Bahama Blue, which is basically our lightest color. And you can see my gel plate is a mess. I'm hoping that these interesting bits that are left on here will get picked up during our printing process. We're going to use this Stencil Girl stencil, piece of deli paper, lay our deli paper down over the top of our gel plate, rub our fingers all over it to pick up as much of that paint as we possibly can. Some of those other paint colors came off on some of the corners. So we're going to let that sit and dry. I'm going to use this is another piece that I've been working with. I'm just going to use this to pick up any remaining paint. And then I'm going to pick this up, and I think if I'm quick, I can pick up some more of this. Yeah, I got some of it. So that'll be an interesting print to build on. Stencil, which is Random Circles. And let's use this Indian Turquoise. I'm not being shy about putting paint on this either. That's about a quarter size puddle. grab our print that we used before. And I don't have to align it perfectly, but I am going to try and line it up as well as I can. Next layer. And I'm going to grab this, just this kind of pickup print that I was using, just to pick up any of that remaining paint that might still be on my plate. Let's pull this up. That should pick up really nicely. See what I can pick up. I picked up a little bit of it. And our last color, which is our darkest, which is Laguna. And our last stencil. Okay, I'm going to line this up as well as I can. It doesn't have to be perfect. Perfect. I like that. That's a great looking print. Okay, let's set this aside and let it dry. I'm going to grab this one and see if I can get any more paint up off of it. A few more, and I could easily use this one as well. Now, let's pull this up and use this one. And there's the third one, which is an equally good print. So I have 3 prints now that I can actually use. I have this one, which was my original print, and I have this one, which was kind of my pull-up print to get all the paint pulled up from it. And any of the 3 would work great. I'm happy with all 3.